light returns.
Before the storms, before the ashes, there was a man named Job. He lived not as a hero, but as one whose heart was quiet before God. He was called blameless and upright, a man who feared God and turned away from evil. In his house, prayers rose like morning incense. Each dawn, he offered sacrifices for his children, in case their hearts had sinned in secret. Job was not just a father. He was a priest of his home, standing between heaven and earth, lifting his family with faith. His wealth was great, his name honored, his life serene. But it was his heart that caught heaven's gaze. For in all the earth, God found no one like him. Then one day, a meeting began, not on earth but in heaven. The sons of God came before the Lord, and among them came the accuser. The Lord said, "Where have you come from?" The accuser replied, "From roaming through the earth, walking back and forth in it." It was not a question for information, but a moment of revelation. For God himself asked, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him, blameless, upright, fearing God, turning from evil." Silence filled the heavens. Then the accuser smirked. "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not placed a hedge around him, his house, his fields, his fortune? Strike all he has, and he will curse you to your face." At that moment, the question of all faiths was spoken. Is love for God born of blessing? Or is it real when the blessings are gone? And heaven waited. God said, "Behold, all he has is in your hand, but do not touch his life." And so it began, not a punishment, but a test of trust. Job knew nothing of this. He rose with the sunrise, as he always did, offering prayers for peace. He did not know that his faith had become the language of heaven's warfare. For the righteous man is sometimes chosen not for destruction, but to reveal truth, that love, when pure, needs no reward. It began like any other day. The sun rose quietly over the land of Uz. Job greeted the dawn with prayer, unaware that heaven had already allowed a storm to come. The first messenger arrived breathless, his face pale, his clothes torn. "The oxen were plowing," he gasped, "and the donkeys feeding beside them. The Sabeans attacked and took them away. Your servants were killed by the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you." Job's heart sank. Before he could speak, another came running. "The fire of God fell from the sky," he cried, "and burned up the sheep and the servants. Only I escaped." And as his voice faded, a third man stumbled forward. "The Chaldeans formed 3 bands," he said, "and carried off your camels. Your servants fell. I alone escaped." The words fell like stones on Job's soul. Each sentence tore another piece of his world away. But before his mind could grasp the loss, a fourth man appeared, trembling. "Your sons and daughters," he whispered, "were feasting in the oldest brother's house. A great wind came from the desert. It struck the 4 corners of the house. It collapsed, and they are gone." For a moment, the earth stood still. No sound, no breath, only silence. Job tore his robe. He fell to the ground. Ashes clung to his hair and tears burned his skin. But in that silence, he did not curse. He worshipped. He whispered, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Heaven listened. The accuser had lost. For when Job bowed in ashes, he proved that love, true love, does not depend on wealth or health, but on the heart that still says, "God is good." The storm passed. The wind grew calm, but another test was still waiting. This time, it would not strike his possessions. It would strike his flesh. And once again, heaven watched as the man of dust became the mirror of divine endurance. Days passed. The air that once carried laughter now carried silence. Job's body, once strong and full of life, was now covered with sores from head to foot. Pain became his only companion. He sat among ashes, his skin cracked and bleeding, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He took a shard of broken pottery and scraped his wounds, each motion whispering the sound of human frailty. His wife, broken by grief, could bear it no longer. She cried, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But Job looked at her, his voice quiet yet steady, and said, "You speak as one of the foolish women speaks. Shall we accept good from God and not adversity?" And in all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Pain had stripped away everything, yet faith remained. Then, from the distance, his 3 friends came, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they saw him from afar, they did not recognize him. They raised their voices and wept. They tore their robes and sat with him on the ground. For 7 days and 7 nights, no one spoke a word. They saw that his grief was very great. In that silence, heaven also watched. For sometimes, faith does not shout. It simply endures. Job's silence was not despair. It was worship in pain, the soundless hymn of a heart, still surrendered to God. He did not understand the reason. He did not see the heavenly conversation, but his soul clung to something deeper, that God's goodness does not vanish in suffering. It hides within it. Heaven was not far. It was watching, waiting, and preparing an answer that would shake the earth and silence the accuser forever. The silence was finally broken. After 7 days and nights of grief, Job opened his mouth and spoke. He did not curse God. He cursed the day of his birth. "May the day perish on which I was born," he whispered, "and the night that said, 'A man-child is conceived.'" It was not rebellion. It was the cry of a heart too heavy for words. His friends listened, but their compassion soon turned into questions. Eliphaz, the oldest, spoke first. His voice carried the weight of experience, but not the tenderness of understanding. "Remember," he said, "whoever perished being innocent. Those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." He meant to comfort Job with logic, but logic cannot heal a bleeding heart. Job closed his eyes. He did not argue. Yet inside, his soul wrestled. Was God angry with him? Had he sinned without knowing? Why was heaven silent? Bildad followed. "God will not reject a blameless man," he said. "Repent, and he will restore you." Zophar's words cut deepest. "Know this," he declared, "God exacts from you less than your iniquity deserves." The words fell like stones to the righteous man. They sounded like betrayal. Job's eyes filled with tears. He looked at his friends and said, "Truly, you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. But I have understanding as well as you." His voice trembled, but it was not pride, it was pain. He continued, "I desire to speak to the Almighty. I want to reason with God." Heaven was still silent, but his faith began to change shape, from simple trust to wrestling trust. Faith that questions is not faith that dies. It is faith that seeks to understand, in the dark where answers hide. Job's friends wanted neat explanations, but Job wanted presence, the voice of God himself. And though he could not hear it yet, he began to sense that his suffering was not punishment, but participation in something eternal. He whispered again, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Heaven trembled. Such words are not born of comfort, but of revelation. There are moments when silence is louder than any storm. Job sat alone beneath the sky. The words of his friends still echoed, sharp, cold, and certain. But the silence of God was heavier than all of them. He searched the heavens and found no answer. He looked to the east, but he was not there. He turned to the west and could not perceive him. Yet deep inside, a voice softer than breath whispered, but he knows the way that I take. When he has tested me, I shall come forth as gold. It was the cry of a faith that had lost everything but God. In the darkness, Job discovered something sacred, that faith is not built on sight, but on surrender. He looked at his wounds, his torn skin, his empty hands. They were no longer signs of loss. They were the marks of being known. He began to see that God's silence was not absence. It was presence, unseen, unspoken, but shaping him like fire shapes gold. When God seems silent, he is not far. He is refining the soul that still dares to believe. Job whispered again, "My Redeemer lives, and though my flesh be destroyed, yet in my flesh shall I see God." These were not words of theory. They were born in ashes. They were faith's final breath, and its eternal beginning. The night grew colder, but Job's heart grew warmer, for even in silence, he began to hear, not with his ears, but with his soul. Heaven listened again. The test was no longer about wealth or pain. It had become about revelation, that true worship is loving God when he hides his face. And in that hiddenness, God was nearer than ever before. The night of silence passed slowly. When the dawn came, it did not bring answers. It brought light. Job lifted his eyes toward the horizon. His body was weak, his world still empty, but something within him began to change. He no longer asked, "Why has this happened to me?" Instead, he whispered, "Who is God, that I may know him even here?" It was the turning of the heart. From demanding reasons to resting in relationship, he realized that understanding was not the purpose of his trial. Transformation was. The same God who had allowed the storm was still present in the silence. The one who seemed hidden was, in truth, shaping him through it. Job began to see that faith is not proven by clarity, but by endurance. He said softly, "God has made my heart soft, and the Almighty has troubled me. Yet I will not turn away." There is a kind of surrender that is not defeat. It is worship. When Job stopped asking for explanations, peace began to enter his soul. Not the peace of understanding, but the peace of trust. Heaven looked down and saw that Job's heart was turning toward light. Even in ruin, he was becoming whole. The angels who once watched his suffering in silence now beheld a mystery, that faith refined by pain shines brighter than faith protected by comfort. In the ashes, Job's love for God had become pure gold. His heart no longer sought relief, only the presence of the one who had never truly left him. He rose slowly from the ground, the morning light upon his face, and though his world was still broken, his soul was free. He whispered, "I know that my Redeemer lives," and the words echoed into eternity. The world had been silent for too long. The cries of a righteous man had reached the heavens, and at last the silence broke. A storm began to form over the horizon. The sky darkened. The wind rose like a living thing, and the air trembled with the weight of glory. Then, from within the whirlwind, a voice, not of judgment, but of presence. "Who is this," it said, "that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me." It was not anger. It was revelation. The same God who once spoke creation into being now spoke to a broken man, sitting in ashes. "Where were you?" the voice thundered. "When I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who marked its dimensions? Who shut the sea behind doors? When it burst forth from the womb, each word was power, but also mercy. God was not destroying Job. He was restoring him. He was pulling Job's vision from his pain back to his presence. The whirlwind roared, but within it came light. Job trembled, his tears mixing with the dust. The questions were not meant to humiliate him, but to heal him. to remind him that the one who controls the stars also holds the suffering of his servant. "Have you commanded the morning?" the voice continued, "and caused the dawn to know its place?" As the storm swirled, Job's heart broke open. He began to see that the mystery of suffering is not solved by reason, but by revelation. The God he sought to understand had never been absent. He had been waiting for Job to see beyond the pain, to see him. The voice grew softer, yet it filled the universe. "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt?" Each question was a mirror, reflecting both the smallness of man and the greatness of God. And for the first time, Job no longer wanted answers. He only wanted the presence of the one who spoke through the storm. The whirlwind calmed, but its echo lingered in Job's soul. The voice that had thundered through creation was now as close as breath. In that moment, Job understood what no words could teach. He saw not the reason for his suffering, but the reality of God, and that was enough. He fell to his knees, his body trembling, his heart overflowing. "I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear," he whispered, "but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." It was not shame, it was awe. Job had met the living God, not the God of doctrine, not the God of debate, but the God who speaks through storms and reveals himself in silence. The dust on his skin became sacred ground. The ashes that once symbolized loss now became the altar of revelation. He saw the truth, that the God who created the stars is not cruel or distant, but wise beyond human reach. His questions faded like mist in sunlight. His pain remained, but it was no longer empty. He realized that suffering had become the place where God had chosen to meet him. The same God who formed galaxies had stooped down to speak to one broken man. In the ashes of the earth, tears streamed down his face. The storm was over, not because the sky was clear, but because his heart was. He no longer needed answers. He had found the answer. And in that sacred stillness, Job bowed low and worshipped. Heaven rejoiced. For the story of Job was never about loss. It was about love refined by fire. When the voice of God faded, silence returned. But it was a different silence now. The wind was calm. The dust settled. And in that stillness, Job's heart found peace. He no longer sought to explain the mystery. He had seen the face of mercy. Then God spoke again. Not to Job this time, but to his friends. The Lord said to Eliphaz, "My wrath is kindled against you and your two friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now go to my servant Job, and offer burnt offerings for yourselves. And my servant Job shall pray for you, for I will accept his prayer, so that I do not deal with you according to your folly." The same man they had judged was now chosen to intercede for them. Job looked at his friends, their faces filled with shame, their eyes pleading for grace. And without hesitation, he prayed for them. No anger, no revenge, only forgiveness. As he prayed, the heavens opened once more, not with thunder, but with blessing. The Lord restored Job's fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. His brothers and sisters came to him again. They ate bread with him in his house. They comforted him for all the evil that the Lord had allowed upon him. Each of them gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. It was not the wealth that mattered. It was the restoration of love. Job had lost everything, but gained something greater, the heart of God. He learned that the true miracle was not that his possessions returned, but that his heart could forgive. Heaven rejoiced, for love had triumphed where pain had once ruled. Job lived many years afterward, seeing his children and grandchildren to the fourth generation. And when his days were fulfilled, he died. an old man, full of days and full of peace. For the man who once sat in ashes had become the testimony of grace, and his story still whispers today. Even in suffering, God is writing redemption. Time has passed, but the question remains the same. Why does God allow the righteous to suffer? The story of Job was not written to answer that question once and for all. It was written to show us that there is a place deeper than answers, a place called trust. Suffering has always been the language of mystery. It is where our wisdom ends and God's begins. When life shatters our expectations, when our prayers seem unanswered, when heaven feels silent, it does not mean God is gone. It means He is near, closer than our breath, listening, shaping, refining. The pain that feels like loss is often the beginning of a new creation. For in the furnace of affliction, God does not destroy His children. He purifies them. Every tear becomes a testimony. Every silence becomes a sentence. In the story, God is still writing. Job's ashes became his altar, and so can ours. When we kneel in the dust of brokenness, we stand on holy ground. The God of Job is the same God who hung upon a cross, who cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Even the Son of God entered the mystery of suffering, not to escape it, but to fill it with meaning. The cross was not the end of love. It was its fullest expression. So when we suffer, we are not abandoned. We are walking the same road that leads to resurrection. God does not promise a life without storms. He promises His presence within them. And that is enough. Pain has a way of changing us. It can make us bitter, or it can make us kind. For Job, suffering became more than sorrow. It became purpose. He no longer lived only to survive. He lived to comfort. Those who once pitied him now came to hear him. For his scars spoke louder than sermons. He would tell them, "There was a time I asked why. Now I ask how. How can I use this pain to love more deeply, to forgive more freely, to trust more fully?" Pain, in the hands of God, became a teacher. It taught him that joy is not the absence of sorrow, but the presence of meaning. Every wound became a window through which God's light could shine. Job's life became a story, not of tragedy, but of transformation. And that is the mystery of grace. What once broke us can be used to heal others. When we allow God to write our story, He never wastes a chapter, not even the dark ones. The nights of tears prepare us for mornings of compassion. The ashes of failure become the soil for new beginnings. Job had once sat alone in pain. Now he walked among the broken, carrying peace in his hands. The same man who asked, "Why me?" now whispered, "Use me." And heaven smiled. For in that simple surrender, the purpose of pain was fulfilled. If Job could speak to us now, his words would not be about suffering, but about seeing. For the story was never only about a man's pain. It was about heaven's purpose. God allowed Job to walk through fire so that every generation after him could see what faith looks like. When everything else is gone, faith that worships in loss, faith that trusts in silence, faith that still whispers, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." Heaven did not test Job to break him, but to reveal him, to show that love for God is stronger than the absence of blessing. That is the lesson heaven wanted us to learn. That true faith does not depend on reward. It depends on relationship. We are not called to understand all things, but to trust the one who holds all things. Suffering, in God's hands, is never wasted. It refines, not destroys. It reveals, not hides. And in the story of Job, heaven gave us a map, a way to walk through our own storms and still find peace. When God seems silent, He is teaching us to listen differently. When He feels distant, He is drawing us deeper. The greatest victory of faith is not found in miracles, but in endurance. Job's story reminds us that the greatest worship is not sung from a place of joy, but from a place of surrender. It is when we have nothing left to hold that we finally discover that God has been holding us all along. So if you find yourself in the ashes, remember this: heaven still watches, heaven still listens, and heaven still plans to restore. For the same God who spoke from the whirlwind is still speaking today in every heart that refuses to give up. Job's story did not end with his own healing. It became a reflection of something far greater, a shadow of a love that would one day heal the world. The ashes of Uz were a preview of another hill, where another innocent man would suffer, not for his sins, but for ours. Like Job, he was blameless and upright. Like Job, he was misunderstood, mocked, and left alone. But unlike Job, he did not only endure pain, he carried it. His name was Jesus, and on a cross outside Jerusalem, he took upon himself every sorrow, every shame, every unanswered question that humanity had ever cried. Where Job once asked, "Why, Lord?" Jesus cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The silence that answered him was not cruelty. It was redemption being written. Heaven had once watched Job in silence. Now, heaven watched its own Son walk through the fire of suffering so that no one would ever walk through it alone again. The cross became the new whirlwind, not of wrath, but of love. And just as Job rose from ashes into restoration, Jesus rose from death into glory. Through his wounds, our pain found meaning. Through his silence, our questions found peace. Through his death, our souls found life. The God who once revealed himself in the storm now revealed himself on the cross. And the same voice that spoke to Job now whispers to every heart, "You are not forgotten. You are redeemed." Job's story was not a tragedy. It was a prophecy of the Redeemer who would come, suffer, and restore all things. The story of Job is the story of us. It is the story of God, turning ashes into altars, pain into praise, and suffering into salvation. The story did not end at the cross. It began there, for the light that broke through Job's darkness was the same light that rose from the tomb. Darkness has always tried to silence faith, but light has never lost its voice. From the ashes of Job to the resurrection morning, one truth has remained unbroken, that no suffering is wasted. In the hands of a loving God, the Redeemer lives. And because he lives, every tear has a purpose. Every loss has a meaning. Every heart that believes will see the dawn again. There are moments when we stand in our own ash heaps, feeling forgotten, abandoned, and unseen. But if we lift our eyes, we will find that the same God who called the stars by name still calls us by ours. He has not left. He is simply working in silence, weaving redemption through what feels like ruin. Job once saw only darkness. Then he saw the light. And once you have seen the light, you cannot forget it. Because that light, the light of Christ, never fades. It shines through loss. It shines through fear. It shines even in the valley of death. And one day, it will shine upon every face that chose to trust. Even when it could not see, the same light that raised Jesus from the grave still lives within us. It is the eternal flame of hope that no storm can extinguish. And when our final night comes, that light will lead us home. For the God of Job, the God of the cross, the God of resurrection, is the same God who walks beside us now, in every tear, in every silence, in every sunrise. His light never fades. It only grows brighter for those who keep believing. The story of Job was never meant to end with Job. It continues in every life that has ever asked, "Where is God when I suffer?" It continues, "In every tear that falls unseen, in every prayer whispered in the dark, in every heart that chooses to trust, even without understanding, the God who restored Job is still restoring lives today. The same hands that healed him still reach out to heal us. For every generation, the message is the same. Pain is not the end. Faith is not forgotten. Love is not defeated. Heaven still writes stories with broken people, and every scar that faith endures becomes a line of grace. In the great book of redemption, the world will keep changing. Empires will rise and fall, but the story of God's love has no ending. For the same light that touched Job in the ashes now shines in the hearts of all who believe. It calls to us in every storm. Do not give up. You are part of my story. And one day, when all our questions are quieted and all our tears are wiped away, we will understand that the pain was never wasted, the silence was never empty, and the faith that endured was never forgotten. The story began in dust. It will end in glory. From Job's ashes to the cross of Christ, from the cross to the light of eternity, it is one story, written by one hand, for one purpose, that the world may know love that never dies. And when we finally stand before Him, the author and finisher of our faith, we will see that every page, even the darkest ones, was part of His masterpiece. The story of Job is the story of grace. And grace, my friend, never ends. If this message touched your heart, share it with someone who may need light in their storm, because every act of sharing hope keeps the story of God's love alive.